Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Texas Flu Action podcast that is hosted by Progress Texas. I am Lana Hansen, and I'll be your host again today. And I'm here to have a conversation I'm incredibly excited about because we need more progressive women running for office in Texas and across the nation. Full stop. Like, that's it. It needs to happen. But the reality is, I mean, look, we're the supermajority at the national level and at the state level. But, in our U.S. House of Representatives right now, there's only 27% of the elected officials are women. In our Texas State House right now, we have 38 female members and 111 male members. And in our state Senate, we have 10 female members and 21 male representatives. And so we are completely outnumbered here. And studies have shown that when women are elected to office, we focus more on education, families, policies that help children, policies that help the environment. So there's a whole slew of reasons why we need more women in office, but there's real barriers to running for office. We can get real rah, excited about recruiting people to run for office, but what does that really mean? And how can we be better supporters of women running for office? Because those barriers can be anything from childcare to finances to a whole slew of other things. So I'm here today with an incredible slate of women that have run for office here in Texas. I've got Akilah Bacy, who was our 2020 candidate for House District 138. Candace Valenzuela, who was our Democratic congressional nominee for seat 24, and Stephanie Phillips, who also ran for the Texas State House in District 73. So thank you all for being here. And Akilah, I would like to start with you and tell me why you decided to run for office. What was it that made you decide you want to throw your hat in the ring? And what was your biggest fear about making that decision?
All righty, sure. Well, thank you so much for having me join, and it feels good to be back into the political sphere and chatting. And I'll give you an answer that's not necessarily my stump speech, but more realistically is that when I was I'm a lawyer, and so what I see, and I do a lot of defense work and discrimination work as well. And what I saw so much was that even as much work as we were trying to do, there was just so much disenfranchisement that brought people to the court system. And so in that work, it was still we're helping an individual one at a time. And what pushed me to run was just to fight for a holistic change, and change that's not only necessarily that you can see in the court system, but change that we see in our community, in our educational system, in our employment system, and things of that sort to slow down the amount of people we see passing through the criminal justice system.
That's great. And, you came so close to winning that seat. You and I have talked about numbers there, and it was less than 2,000 votes. And, what we've seen across the state, and this is something that we'll get into in a little bit too, that the women like yourselves that closed those gaps in those districts, we're seeing the new congressional maps really carve up those districts because they are very fearful of the work that y'all did and the progress that you made there. Yes, slicing and dicing, Candace, that is exactly what they're doing. And so, but again, we'll get into that in just a minute. But Candace, I'd like to talk to you for a second because you ran and became a school board trustee first, and then decided to run as a congressional candidate, which, is a big, heavy lift, probably compared to a race for school board. And what was it that, A, made you decide to do that? And B, what was the thing that you thought, I'm not sure if I can do this, or I don't have the support to get this done? What would make it easier?
So just like Akilah, I had the opportunity in my capacity as a school board trustee to get up close and personal with a lot of issues facing families. And as many wonderful programs you can put into schools, as much as you can raise teacher pay, as much as you can make our schools a great place for our community to feel welcome, if parents don't have a steady place to live, if they can't afford food, if they can't afford healthcare, kids are going to be bouncing around from place to place. This was something I experienced growing up myself. I was housing insecure. I was food insecure. And I feel like the difficulties of my childhood are nothing compared to what I was seeing kids facing even before COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So it was imperative to me to work on some of the systemic issues so that I could better deliver for the community I was trying to serve. But there are huge barriers to entry. Rep Presley says those who are closest to the pain need to be closest to the power, but those who are closest to the pain are not closest to the money.
Mm-hmm.
And I sure, I came from two military parents. My mom and dad, they were enlisted. So that meant that they didn't go to college. They didn't have a wealthy network of friends to call on when I decided to run for office. I happened to be the first in my family to go to college. I went to a wonderful college and it was a great experience, but I'm also a millennial.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the millennial generation, we're struggling to catch up to where our parents were. We're struggling to find our footing. We're if we have generational wealth, we're not building it. If we didn't have generational wealth, chances are we're also paying back into our families up and down and accruing debt. So when I am going up for this big congressional race, standard advice, standard practices says that you should be able to raise $100,000
Mm-hmm.
from your personal network.
Right.
And I see Akilah laughing. That's exactly how I felt. I'm just like, wait, what? $100,000. And I decided that I was going to ask my community for help because I was asking for my community to help my community. I decided that I was going to work very, very hard to leverage a lot of the relationships I'd made, as a school board trustee, working with folks and delivering. But in terms of being able to call up my college chums and ask them for $2,800 in one sitting, or be able to, again, I couldn't ask my family for that kind of money. It wasn't happening. And that's not standard for the vast majority of people who find themselves running for office. Most folks who find themselves running for office have, one, the time, two, the money to take time off of work to put in the hours to run for office, because it takes many. And the bigger the office, when you're talking about 700,000 plus people, it's a full-time job to do the work to outreach to them, and then to have the networks on top of having the personal money. All of those things together are gigantic barriers to entry for people who are struggling to pay for healthcare, for people who are struggling as they're seeing staples in their diets go up. They're just trying to get through the day to day. And those are the people that we need to see more of in office, but it's going to be very difficult if things keep progressing, or I'm going to say regressing, the way that they are.
100%. I mean, I think you touched on it. It's right there. That says everything, that our government is not representative of the people, because the people that need to be in government can't afford to run for those offices, right? Or maybe if we took that off the table, where they didn't feel the pressure to need to raise that money. I mean, I've had many friends who have thought about running for office and have sat down with consultants, and consultants have said something similar, but even higher dollar amounts. And they said, I can't do it. And they won't run. Right. And so I think that conversation should be changed, right? Like, we do need money to run for office, but maybe that pressure shouldn't be put on these people that are putting themselves out there to do it, especially from the beginning. If there was a way to find other funding or other resources, and there are some groups that have done that out there and do offer resources. So Stephanie, I'll pivot to you here. Did you have any opportunity for people to make investment early on for you financially in your race?
No, because I was running outside of an urban area. Mm-hmm. So I was running in really basically part of my county's area was like a 80-20, 75-25 Republican district. So we knew going in, it's not like I was going to win. But the incumbent in this race ran unopposed and then proceeded to go start organizing anti-Muslim hate rallies in Fredericksburg, to the point that he got called out by the ACLU and made the New York Times for how Islamophobic and racist he was being. Mm-hmm. But when we don't run candidates at all, I'm the first person who ran in this seat in 10 years. Somebody else ran then, but besides that one guy who's a wonderful person, apparently he's passed away. I'm the only person living who's, Democrat who's run for this seat. And it's only been 2 of us in 20 years. So that means that there's nobody who has the experience of having run in the district. There's no existing list. There's no existing funders. There's no existing people who've helped, who've been part of a volunteer network. Nobody really, there's not the connections between the counties, because if you're in an urban area, you have a small part of a larger county. Maybe it's gerrymandered. The outside of the urban areas, I had 3 counties. I had 2,300 square miles. That was my district. You have the guy, Joe Herrera ran to the west of me. He had 11 counties. And so you don't have the Democratic donor infrastructure in the rural. You think, oh, there's a lot of money in the Hill Country. They're donating up ticket. They're donating, to the Senate candidates. They're donating presidential candidates. They're having fundraisers but they're not for their local candidates. And they've lost so many times. The Democrats are demoralized, and they're afraid of being Democrats. So I think we fail as a party, as a progressive community, when we say, oh, that area's got 75% Republicans. We're not going to go there. Mm-hmm. Because that tells that 25% of the population, we don't care about you. That means nobody's going to these places and articulating about why we need to fund public education, or about why we need to have healthcare and reproductive healthcare that's includes abortion care. Nobody's having these conversations. And so people have never heard the progressive or the Democratic side of the argument. And a lot of the times they hear it and they say, yeah, I agree, but they've never met a Democrat before.
Well, so, I think that, Stephanie, to your point, and I would argue and push back a little bit, when they say these districts are 75-25, how do they know? Nobody's making an investment or doing any of the work out there. It could be 50-50, but we're not going to know that until we're investing in communities. And I know that, from the top down, the structure is, well, we invest where we think we can win. But how are we going to ever win or flip these seats if we are not investing not only money, but people, power in those areas? Right. And so, I think that's a part, as the executive director of a grassroots organization that's trying to build from the ground up, that's where I get frustrated. Right. Because I'm like, we need boots on the ground everywhere, identifying these people and updating these numbers and the data, so that when people like yourself do the heavy lifting of running in these seats, we can actually say to you, Stephanie, it's not 25% of people, it's 40. Like, that's something. Right.
Well, and in Fredericksburg, in Gillespie County, for example, there's about 500 people that voted for Trump and me and Chip Roy, because I went and talked to them about issues, and they were like, "Oh, I guess I could vote for that Democrat." I didn't moderate my message. I didn't, pretend to be a Republican. I didn't put on a cowboy hat and all of that stuff that we do to try to look so conservative to appeal to those people.
Right. I think we're losing.
Yeah, I think we might have lost Stephanie a little bit. So I'm going to give her a chance to come back. But, Akilah, I want to come back to you for a second and tell me, what you thought it was going to be like running for office versus what it was.
Oh, my goodness.
What did it look like when you are in the thick of it? Okay.
I don't even know if I could see when I was in the thick of it. I feel like every day and every moment was just about going forward. But I would say what I thought it was is I thought I was ready, right? I had gone to the trainings. Well, one, I had already been involved with more community or organizing things. Then I had gone to the trainings. I had helped out on other campaigns. And so, I thought, well, it's my campaign. I know what this is going to look like. I had no idea. It's that saying that they say you're building a plane as you're flying it. It is very cliche, but it is also very, very true. There's a reason that they say that. And as someone who's very type A, and and very anxious, that did add a lot of stress to me. And then also, I know that Stephanie was talking about, like, we're in the more rural areas, you might not get as much assistance. Well, at the time, I was one of the more targeted races for the state house. And I will say this is that I didn't get very much assistance until the very end, until late August. And so, yeah, there was a lot of money that poured in late August. But, remember, I ran for 18 months, approximately, without, with essentially doing what Candace did and calling my family and saying, all right, I need another 25. I need another 100 guys. Okay. I need another 250. Come on. And then coming out of a primary, spending all of a whopping $20,000, because that's what I could raise. And so, I think we're talking about investing. I think we need to invest in candidates and races early and often. And that is probably one thing that I did not expect, was how hard it was actually going to be. Because when you do have people who are not always, right? Because there are people who do have privileges, and I have certain privileges, of course, as well, but who do have those privileges and can run for office with that financial backing. But a lot of times you have candidates, like myself, like Candace, who don't have those backgrounds and are running because of what we see and because our hearts are for the community. And so we're really fighting this uphill battle because we're fighting for the people in our community. The people in the community don't have that infrastructure, that funding to assist us financially.
And I mean, as an outsider looking in here, clearly I've never run for office, but it's so frustrating for me to sit here and have this conversation revolve around money, right? Yeah. Like that money becomes the thing that is preventing women like y'all from having the resources that you need to get this done, because we should be so much bigger than that. Yeah. What y'all could do in office is so much bigger than that and so important. But, here we are, right? Talking about that being the biggest barrier. And that just, is beyond frustrating to me. I mean, how do we change it? Y'all, what do we do? And I'm just going to throw out there open. Anybody, jump on. How do we change it?
I'll let them go ahead and chat. I just said something. I'll let them.
Okay. Go ahead, Candace.
So talking about, and it's a dirty word for some folks because they don't quite understand how election money works, but publicly financed elections or, just elections where the money isn't necessarily coming from what an individual candidate can raise, or not entirely from that much money. When we're talking about elections and folks just getting money from corporate interests, and that happens a lot more at the state level because there are no contribution limits in Texas. Let me repeat, there are no contribution limits in Texas. That means that people like Ken Paxton can go into a room and have a lunch and somebody can drop $500,000 into his campaign account, and it's happened. And it makes it impossible for folks that may better represent the people to get in and have a voice. But what folks don't understand when it comes to money in campaigns, they think of it as candidates somehow having money and living off of it and enjoying it. But that all of that money is communication. All of that money is putting your face in front of them and getting through all of the distractions in their daily lives to let them know that you're there to work for them. And when you're talking about progressive candidates, you're talking about folks that come out of, being public defenders or being in the nonprofit sector or doing other jobs that are intended to save the world. Teachers, lots of teachers, they're not going to come from those sectors where they can just take a lot of money. And some of them come up and they do, but it may not necessarily always be for the right reasons. It was one of the reasons I rejected corporate PAC money. And I took a lot of guff for that from folks who have been raising money in these spaces. They said, you're a woman of color. Did you know that you're a woman of color and it is so much harder for you and we see that it's so much harder for you, and we see how you're working, and you really need to rethink that corporate PAC pledge. You know, older members than me who are like, okay, you're kind of progressive, but we can look past that, but maybe think a little bit about this corporate PAC thing. And at the end of the day, it was really nice not to wonder what one company or another company would think. I mean, I want their jobs, and I want to help them to grow and be economically powerful, but I don't want that to be at the expense of my constituents. And I can make decisions like those. I can work with businesses as a partner instead of as a dependent if I reject corporate PAC money. And I think when we start to reject corporate PACs, you know, when we're talking about the organization End Citizens United, it's a super PAC and a PAC, and it's working very hard to get rid of itself. It's working hard to make it so that these PACs don't speak as much as voters. And we have to look at a bunch of different ways to bring democracy back to the people, because we've drifted far away.
I agree. And so I'm curious, y'all, in your races, which, you know, both, you know, we're fairly high dollar at the end. What do you feel like was the biggest waste of money? If you were to run again, what would you not spend money on?
Oh man, I laugh because there's so much.
Right? I mean, I just, you know, for people that are thinking about doing it, right? Like, let's set them up for success. Like, don't spend your dollars here. I mean,
you know, I think that's really hard to say about a race, because you don't know until you're in the race what money was wasted and what money was not wasted.
Gotcha.
I absolutely believe that there were consultants who took advantage of the amount of money that was coming in, you know, and it was my first race, so you don't really know. So I would definitely, I say this, especially to women, vet your consultants and go with the consultants that you trust. One thing that I learned, and you know, and it's in my practice and in career, is that a lot of times when it gets to the end of things here, is that there is no work-life balance towards the end of a campaign. And so I need a consultant that I can talk to at 10 o'clock because something happened, right? I need someone on Saturday. And I did find a lot of that, right? Is that it was, oh, we'll schedule a time. Let's put something on the books. I'm like, we don't have time to put something on the books.
The time is now.
Yeah, right. Because they're spreading lies across TV now. So we can't wait 2 weeks to make a game plan, because that's election day. But a lot of times that happened. And so, especially for women, I would say talk to other women who've ran campaigns, whether they won or lost, that you respected and that you admired, that you like how they ran them. And it's something I was talking to Stephanie about, is that she, you know, we've been talking about helping other candidates who might not have had a lot of money. And she said, well, I know you had a lot of money. I said, no, I didn't. I had a lot of money after August, right? I didn't have a lot of money before August. And so, but I was telling her what I did was I looked at a lot of things on my own, right? A lot of crafty stuff, using different templates, things like Canva, things of that on my own. And then when people say, oh, you know what, no, we'll do that. It just cost us $750 a week to do it. Then I said, well, no, thank you, because for me, it's free. So I will do that myself and not have to, you know what I mean? So things like that you can do yourself, do them, and get to the nitty gritty of it. Because a lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, a candidate's not supposed to do that. A candidate's only supposed to worry about this. But get in the nitty gritty and be about your race. I think that is so important, that you run your race, and you're not only just raising money for someone else to run your race.
I mean, I think those are really great points. And, you know, there's two things that, well, first I want to pivot and say to Stephanie, or ask Stephanie, there are a lot of barriers that aren't just money. And you know, your race specific, being in a more rural area, I think is really a testimony to that. So talk about some of the other things that you needed to like jump in a race that you didn't feel like were accessible. And I know you're trying to help make a difference for others in that too. So please tell us about it.
Yeah. Okay. So two things. One, myself and another candidate, former candidate, Claire Barnett, we both ran twice in adjacent districts. We're putting together a 527 organization called Blue Horizon Texas. And the goal is going to be to help people especially outside of the urban areas, especially maybe your non-traditional candidates, to run for office, to figure out how to solve some of these problems without it just being about needing someone to write a check. And there's a disconnect because we, I think, as a larger Democratic progressive community, feel like people should be running up and down the ballot. We should have candidates in Lubbock and Lufkin and Beaumont, and we feel that now. We didn't used to feel that so much, and now that's like what we want to have happen. We also feel like it shouldn't be the same kind of candidate who maybe ran 20, 25 years ago, like a kind of nice, rich white guy who is maybe not as racist and sexist as everybody else, which was sort of our typical Democratic candidate. Nothing against those guys, but we have this beautiful idea of, we want moms, we want people of color, we want working people, we want teachers, we want LGBTQ, but we've had a radical transformation in who we think the candidate should be and where they should run. We haven't had a radical transformation in what does the campaign infrastructure look like, and what does the support network look like. So we're continuing to reproduce campaigns that are basically about the campaign as a product, and that product person is supposed to sit your ass down, and raise money all day, so that you can build an advertising team around you who's going to sell you better than the other guy. If you're, one of us, you maybe have you maybe don't have money, but like maybe you can figure out Canva and you can figure out graphics. Maybe your real need is not somebody who can write you a big check. It's somebody who'll sit with your kids so that you can be on Zoom calls. Or maybe someone could lend you a car so that you could drive all over your big district and not put 20,000 miles on your car, which in our bigger districts, that's what we end up doing. And so that is really the goal of the new organization, is to look at who the candidates are and what the districts are, what the matches are, and what the actual needs are, instead of just the answer to every campaign is money and consultants. So we're hoping to solve some problems and make it possible for more people to run without being just overwhelmed, stressed out, losing money, spending more money than we should, or completely neglecting your family to the point that it becomes a problem.
Sure,
go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say, well, that's really an important point. We've discussed multiple times how running for office is not a part-time job, right? And so that's a barrier too for women that are parents, and if you're not financially in the situation where you can self-fund, you're working a job and being a mother and trying to run for office, so, I think that infrastructure, and the value in that infrastructure, whether it's support with childcare, support with clothing that maybe you can't afford so that you look the part when you're at events, whatever that looks like is massively important to lifting up women and having them see greater success in running for office.
Although I'll chime in there. Unfortunately, if you happen to run in a federal race and somebody wants to help you out with clothes, it's very difficult for that to happen without it going into campaign finance issues. I know that there were a couple of organizations who were offering to dress candidates and buy them clothes. And, when I announced for Congress, it was in my post-pregnancy body. So I needed clothes. I mean, I'd had a baby a couple of months before I'd started running. So I applied for this and they said, "You're wonderful. Of course we want you in our clothes, but it's illegal." So we're really sorry about that. And I think this also goes back to talking about federal campaign finance laws and how they apply to women and how they hurt women. But there are a lot of different barriers to entry. Maybe lending clothes might be a good way to go about it, so that you don't, get into that situation. But it's crazy how many things suddenly jump in front of you, how many things you suddenly need to spend money on when you start running for office. And just going back to your question about how I would spend my money differently, I think I was very lucky to have the experience of having run for school board and having my hands in absolutely every aspect of it. But when I started to run for Congress, I needed to sit down and gather resources before giving everybody my money. And there were lots of consultants who from jump were just like, start paying me right now, and you'll never actually have to do this campaign. I'll just do it all for you. And that was not the kind of race I wanted, but it was also the kind that was the best way to not have a race by the time the primary happens, because you're broke several times over and you've gone through all your staff because you can't pay them because you're paying 2 consultants. It's really bad. I wish I had a more articulate way to say that, but it really hurts candidates who get bamboozled by folks who come in and they talk quickly and they say, you need this and you need this and you need this and you need this. And you don't need all of those things all at once, all at first. Some of those things you build into your campaign as the structure tends to build. And the biggest thing that you need to start with at the very beginning is your core group of volunteers, and just gather your finances so that you'll be able to have that machine going so that you'll be able to pay people later.
Sure. And I would imagine that as you're doing that, and if you're not able to abide by the advice that you're being given as a new candidate and not being sure, of what you're doing, right? So really relying on what they're saying, probably, if you can't get that in line, I'm guessing makes you feel sort of insecure in what you're doing. And like, am I not really able to do this? And, my hope would be that we could find a way to empower people, even though they might not be able to hit those metrics right away, right? That there's ways to be successful without doing that traditional outline would be my hope moving forward, and seeing more support for women.
The view of money is so skewed in that world. And it was very hard for me, again, scaling upward. At one point, I think my very first quarter that I was raising money, I raised $80,000. That's 3 months. I never personally made $80,000 in my life, and in a year, much less in 3 months. And the way that analysts looked at it, well, she's kind of broke, but she's doing okay. And it is beyond my reckoning. At one point I raised more money than any house I'd ever lived in my whole life. And it was just like nothing to people around me, at least in campaign world. I try to stay in contact with as many normal people as possible so that I could talk this through, because if you don't, you just start to lose your sense of what the real world is like.
Well, and probably why you got into it in the first place, might start to get a little convoluted, I can imagine, in that situation. And so I know we're running over time, but I've just enjoyed talking with you all so much. And you've given us, such incredible information that I do have to ask a couple other things while I have you here. And, one is I would love to know, if y'all would think about doing it again. Like, are you still interested in running for office? Did, not being successful last year, but coming so close, make you think you wanted to get in again, or make you think like, maybe this isn't for me? So Akilah, I'll let you answer first.
Well, one thing that you just said that I've actually kind of been grappling with this past year is that we weren't successful. And I think we have to look at what we consider to be successful per
100%. Yes. Thank you for that.
Because I look at it in House District 138, we bought out 7,000 more Democratic voters than the last highest race that they ever had. And to me, finding that in the suburbs is a success. We had people who were just excited and getting involved, and are now with me working on organizing with like Blue Action Dems and things of that sort because of the campaign that we ran. So that's success as well. And so when I look at that, is it hard when you look at that number on election night and you're like, wow, yes, it is very hard. And it's not going to get easier. You all know that in the weeks to come, especially when you start seeing what those people who we were running against are doing and what we're trying to prevent, it makes it even harder. But I think about that and I say, if it was worth doing and trying before, it's worth trying again. Now, one thing I say is that I don't want to be a great candidate forever, right? I eventually want to be elected. And so, I absolutely plan on running again. But when that time is, I am not sure yet. But, if God says the same, I will at some point be back on the ballot.
I think that's such a good point because you did move the needle so much. And Candace, I know that your congressional race was the closest in the state with only 4,500 votes as the vote gap. And that is huge. And again, to what we talked about at the beginning that I wanted to circle back to, but we're sort of running out of time, is that it is those districts that they're taking the most time to carve up now because of the progress that you all made. And you're right, Akilah. I'm so glad you corrected me on that. That is success, right? That is moving the ball forward. Everything is incremental, and we cannot forget that. So, Candace, do you think you'll do it again?
And this is a question I've been getting since November of 2020. Somehow people have been asking me, so are you ready to get started? And the short answer is, unfortunately, I've been elected to public office before, and I was able to get my food service members and janitorial staff a living wage. It wasn't as high as I wanted, but I still got it for them. Was able to put STEM academies and fine arts academies in our elementary schools and prepare infrastructure for 20 years into the future. I'm kind of addicted to effective governance. If I hadn't had that experience, if I hadn't been able to push progressive policies forward to help people and help make their lives better, I would have walked away from this. I wouldn't have started this. This is ridiculous. But given that I understand how much how gratifying it is to be someone's voice, to bring them to the table with me when I sit down, I'm going to do it again. And now, when, that is an open question. In what capacity, that is an open question. Right now, I actually have a pretty good life. Some people sat down with me and they said, you've got this husband, he likes you, and 2 children, they seem to like you. Why are you doing this? And I mean, the answer to that question is, I have been on the other side of this. I've been food insecure. I've been housing insecure. I grew up with a single mom who was a veteran and didn't get all of the support that she needed. And I, as much of a soccer mom as I am, as competitive as I am, I want my kid to win because he was playing on a level playing field with everyone else. I don't want him to win because nobody has soccer shoes. Nobody has the ability to come out and really compete. So as long as there are kids that don't have their basic needs met, as long as there are families that are suffering, as long as we need healthcare, as long as we need to protect our environment, you're not getting rid of me.
Well, good. I mean, and if you ever start to step out, we're going to be calling you again, reminding you, because I think that, the truth is we're all, itching for people like y'all to run for these seats, to end up in these seats, to, affect that change. And I think that once you step into activism and that type of work, there's never turning a blind eye to it again. Once you're committed to this type of change and you start to learn about how powerful it is and the work that needs to be done, it's impossible to ignore it from there. And so, okay, Stephanie, what about you? Do you think you'll do it again?
Maybe. Not now, not this cycle. I'm really committed to organizing right now. What really moved me was how many people where we'd knocked on their door and they're like, a Democrat has never knocked on my door before. Right. And a Democrat has never, one time we were doing actually a phone bank training and people were so scared. Nobody in the room had ever made a phone call before. My partner was my campaign manager. They say never do that, but that's, we didn't have a lot of people who were had run campaigns or anything. So Kathy was my campaign manager and she's running the phone bank training. Very first call, so answers the phone. They said, "You're a Democrat?" And they said, "Hey, everybody." And they had company. And they said, "Hey, everybody, there's a Democrat on the phone calling about politics." And so we had a bunch of people on speakerphone because we had trainees and New Braunfels who've never made a phone call before. And they're calling people who have never had a Democrat call them before, and they started cheering. So the very first phone bank in a we're scared to call our scary neighbors phone bank training, they were cheering like, "Yay, you're calling!" And that would happen. I mean, block walking or ranch walking. I would call ahead and say, "Hey, can I come deliver a sign?" End up giving a sign to someone across the street too, and they'd call up to the house, "Honey, there's a Democrat at the door." And there was one place out near Bernie, the whole family came out to take a picture with me because a Democrat had never been there before. And I think that's why we lose the rural areas so badly. When people say we don't show up, they really mean we don't show up. And we've done some phone calling. It was, again, Kathy was doing phone calling, and she was talking. I heard her out on the back porch. She's talking to somebody for like a half an hour. And I thought maybe a friend had called. And it turns out it was a Hispanic woman in like Willow City, Fredericksburg area. And something like 10 family members living all around, some like trailers kind of living all together. And they had 10 registered voters who most of them had never voted. And because somebody had tried and been turned away around an ID issue, or somebody had been tried and then they told, so they were very worried that they were going to get in trouble, that something was going to happen to them. And she stayed on the phone, talked them all the way through it, where to go, maps and everything. Well, I found out I ran the second time, and we got a sign request from the same address to come and bring a sign out. And so one of my volunteers visited that same woman, and across the street from her, family compound was a massive Trump sign. The guy across the street, when you're in the rural areas, that's your neighbor, is somebody with Confederate flags or Trump flags or all of that stuff. And so it's frightening. But when you can go and find the Democrats, they're there, but they're hiding because they think they're all alone. So you can really change the vibe of an area by getting a few people. You notice like one person puts the sign out, then their neighbor does too, or the person across the street. But it's the fear factor is such a big deal, way bigger than issues. It's the fear factor.
Sure. And that has honestly been the story of the type of organizing that Blue Action does. Every group that has started a chapter here has said they've knocked a door and that person has said, "I am a Democrat in this neighborhood, but there aren't any others here," when we've just been 3 doors down and that person said the same thing. And so that's why we have to continue to be knocking every door and connecting with every voter, because once we empower people with the knowledge that they are not alone, they're going to be ready to show up and do the work. And, so I always try to wrap up these shows with some action items. And, now that we have everybody's attention, there are things that you can do to help further support these candidates. And I hope everybody walks away from here really thinking about what it means to elect progressive women, what it means to ask them to run as a candidate, and how you really can support them, whether that's financially or through childcare or through knocking a door. We need everybody doing the work. And, also reach out and support orgs that do support women running for office. Make them a priority. Men will stand up and run for office whether they're qualified or not. Women need to be asked to do it, and they generally need to be asked 7 times, and that's bullshit. We need to have support in place that they will just know that they can show up and be supported. And then support groups like Blue Action Democrats. We're out there knocking the doors and building infrastructure so that when these incredible candidates show up and decide to run for office, we're there with good data, good volunteers, and can help them get out the word about the good work that they plan to do. And so thank you, Candace, Akilah, Stephanie. This has been great. I'm so thankful to call y'all friends and so proud of the work that every one of you are doing. And thanks again to Progress Texas for hosting this podcast. But I hope y'all have a great week and that you'll join us again next week.
Definitely will. It's so good to see everyone too.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
y'all.
you so much.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.